how's it going? It's a very cozy day.
So, Ivan and I met up just a little bit before we came here, and I did a story with him for our September issue on making one particular kind of ramen at home called mazemen ramen. And I remarked to him, I talked to him at length in preparation for this story. We talked about the recipe, we talked about his background. I knew when he'd opened his restaurants in Japan. But then when I was looking through his book today before coming here, it surprised me all over again that the first Ivan Ramen in Tokyo he opened in 2007, which is really, it's not that long ago. I mean, and so much of his story is the decades that precede this moment when he opens the restaurant, and this sort of seemingly unlikely event of this American guy becoming a total ramen star in Tokyo. And so, a great place to start, I think, would be for Ivan to talk a little bit about what led up to that. How did you end up in Tokyo suddenly, and then opening a ramen place?
Right. Well, I mean, it wasn't really so sudden, and. This is really a story of a Japanophile turned chef who stumbled into opening a restaurant rather than a chef who, had an epiphany while living in New York that he always wanted to have a ramen shop, that moved there and opened it. It really was the opposite way. It's just as simple as when I was 15, a new restaurant opened in town. It happened to be a Japanese restaurant, and they happened to need a dishwasher. And in the course of working there, I sort of fell in love with Japanese food, and the chefs who fed me every day, I thought were the coolest, kindest guys I'd ever met. And it made a real impression on me. And so I've sort of started on this journey of this love of Japan at the age of 15 or 16, really. And that sort of folded into majoring in Japanese when I went to college, and it seemed to be a pretty good fit. And when I graduated college, how many people really knew what they wanted to do when they graduated college? I mean, I don't know too many people. So it sort of made sense that I would get on a plane and move to Japan. It seemed almost dumb to not do that. And so I did that, and I've just sort of been on this Japanese journey, and I lived there during the bubble years in the 80s, and but because I wasn't an academic and because I wasn't a white-collar type, I didn't know what the hell to do with this ability to speak Japanese. And so, I kind of left Japan in the end of the 80s with my tail between my legs, and sort of felt like, what am I going to do with myself? And I had a job I didn't like, and I was sort of bumming around, and I just had this epiphany. I've been obsessed with food all my life, and I ended up becoming, a cook, and went to the CIA, and it's funny. I was thinking about this the other day. I've met people who love Japan so much that they know that they want to be a cook that cooks Japanese food, and then they learn to speak Japanese, and then they go to the CIA and they study cooking, and then they plan on going to Japan, and they become these guys who do Japanese cooking. And it never even occurred to me that I would have anything to do with food and Japan. It was really very independent. And the years I cooked after the CIA, I did the regular sort of CIA thing, and I got a job at a 4-star French restaurant. I worked there. I worked at Mesa Grill. I worked, I did that sort of, 3-star, 4-star kind of route for a while, and never really, it bothered me that I wasn't doing anything with Japanese. I had a Japanese wife, and I had Japanese friends, and I spoke Japanese, and I thought in Japanese and things like that, but I never really equated the two, and so that was just sort of my life for a long time, until I then had an epiphany that it was time to go back to Japan, and my family was angry with me, and my friends couldn't understand why I would just, sell my beautiful apartment in Park Slope and sell my car and give away all my clothes and move to Japan with a couple of boxes and my kids. But you know, it somehow made sense. And throughout my life, one of the hallmarks of myself is that I do whatever I feel like doing. And that was one of them. And so, you know, I ended up going back to Japan just knowing that when I had left, you know, 10 or 15 years before, I sort of left promising that I would make it back. And that, you know, and that was just sort of a gut feeling. It was time to move back. And my wife was real supportive, and we all just went back, and she had a great job. I took care of the kids. I hung out. And then I was like, you know, downloading a lot of Grey's Anatomy on my computer and watching silly comedies, and she said very gently, I think it's time to get a job. And she sort of nudged me along, and so the whole ramen thing, it's you know, it's funny because it really, it just sort of happened. I mean, I've been, you know, I lived all these years in New York after my first stint in Japan, and ramen was one of the only things you couldn't get in New York. You know, you could get very good sushi, you know, and by that time Sushi Yasuda had opened, and there was Kuruma Sushi, and there was a whole bunch of really good places where you could get top-notch food, and there were tons of little tiny, you know, izakaya, and there was sakagura, and you could sort of almost replicate the Japanese experience in New York by the mid-90s, and I had a lot of those little places where I could go in, I didn't have to speak any English, I could eat Japanese food and have this really cool experience, but there was no ramen. I think like Sapporo had ramen, and I'm sorry, it was terrible. And that was the only ramen. And, you know, so, you know, the few times I had visited Japan over the years, the first thing I would do is get off the plane and eat ramen. And I was so interested in it that when we finally moved back, my wife and I ate ramen sometimes 3 or 4 days a week. I was her assistant. So she would do these styling jobs for television programs and magazines, and I would take her in the car to prop shops, and she would get all these things she had to use for photo shoots and TV sets. And she would sit next to me with her cell phone, and they had something called a ramen navi. They shorten everything in Japanese, you know. So it's the little ramen navigation app. And she would, you know, type in our location, and we would sort of drive aimlessly through these very narrow streets that, you know, about the width of these 3 chairs. And we would drive down these little tiny roads and searching out these tiny shops, and you'd turn a corner and you'd see a line of people outside the door, and we'd say, oh, you know, that's the shop, and we would eat, and you know, and we did this, you know, over and over again, eating all this ramen, and it's sort of, I started getting an idea of what style I liked, and you know, I had always eaten, you know, I had never really eaten this double soup, which I write about in the book, the style I do, which is a chicken soup and a dashi, a dried fish, Japanese soup. Fish soup, and there were more and more of these places that would do these 2 soups combined, and also the shio flavor, which is Japanese sea salt, and I was intrigued by it, and it's very light and very vibrant flavored ramen, and I was really intrigued by it, and we just started actually seeking out those shops more and more and more, so that by the time I had sort of realized I wanted to have a restaurant, and I had gone through all these different thought processes about what kind of shop I wanted to open to, and as a chef, you know, some chefs from the very day they start cooking, they know what kind of chef they are, you know, they go to France and they only cook French food, and they, you know, they're a Francophile, or they hang out in Italy and they know they want to they want to cook Italian food, or, you know, whatever it is, or they trained under someone specific and they know that that's the type of cuisine they want to do. And I was never really that kind of a guy. I've always done Ivan food, you know, whatever that is, you know, or whatever place I worked, I cooked whatever food the chef did. But, you know, I learned a lot from Bobby Flay, and I learned to use chilies, and I still use them, and I think I use them pretty well, but I never necessarily wanted to be a Southwestern cook, and I never, I worked at Lutece, and it was great, but, if I never turned another vegetable until I die, it'd be fine. And I didn't want to be a French chef either. And to make things really even worse, in Japan, all those cuisines are so well represented. There's all these French guys who are like amazing, and they do amazing French restaurants, and there's all these Japanese guys who are like, they would tell me their stories. I'm like, oh, I went to Paris and I slept on like a cobblestone floor every night, and I was freezing, but I did it for 5 years, and then they would come back and they were like brilliant. They made these amazing things. I was like, well, what kind? I don't want to do French food, and I don't want to do Italian food, and I don't know what to do. And then what would I do if I was in New York? I would do American regional cuisine, right? It would be, I've worked at all these different places, I've incorporated these things I've learned, and now I'm doing my interpretation of American regional cuisine. And if the food was good and I made the restaurant right, people would say, oh, I get it, hey, that's good. But in Tokyo, people are like, well, you're American, right? So you like pizza, spaghetti, hot dog, what is it you serve, And when I would try to explain to them, if I tried to explain to them, it's sort of a regional cuisine kind of thing, it wouldn't make any sense. So we sort of checked that off early on. It wasn't going to work, and so we just sort of batted around all these different ideas, and my wife started saying, why don't you open a ramen shop? And I was like, you're crazy. I said, I don't know anything about ramen. She goes, you'll figure it out. It's okay. And I said, yeah, that's a funny idea. And I just sort of kept pushing her off. But every few months she would bring it up again. And this whole thing was was over the course of a year. I think from the time I decided it was time to like go back to work and get a job, and and I actually interviewed for some jobs too, to be the chef at the American consulate, until I found out it was the sous chef job, and then I didn't want to be a sous chef anymore, and then I just sort of had an epiphany that I finally sort of got it. That I think I visited, New York, and it was 2006, and Momofuku was going strong, and here was this American guy making ramen, and people were lining up to eat it, and I was like, fuck, I missed the boat, and I was like, I can't believe, I was just like, wow, this is so amazing, you can do this. And I was like, well, if he can do it, I mean, I can do it, and I'm going to do it in Japan, so I didn't even have to compete with him,
Yeah, you just had to compete with the 10,000 other ramen shops in Tokyo.
Yeah, I didn't really think about that. It was kind of funny. But I mean, I was telling Dan, I'm sort of a happy-go-lucky type, and sometimes my brother-in-law's laughing, but sometimes it's actually when I was younger, it was sort of detrimental because I think I was seen. As I didn't take anything all that seriously, but as I got older, things changed. I tell about in the book, my first wife died when my son was young, and I was all of a sudden thrust into this position of leading rather than following, and I sort of had a whole new way of seeing life because I couldn't, for a long time I was very comfortable letting people make decisions for me, or sort of sitting back and watching, and I think I sort of realized that I couldn't do that anymore, and so over the last 15 years things really changed for me, and I think for the first time in my life I was in a position to make some real decisions and do things. I always did things on my terms anyway, but I think I was ready to do things excellent. And I think up until a certain point in my life, I don't think I ever really embraced excellence. When I was telling Daniel when I started this shop, I said to my wife, I said, we're going to have the best ramen in Tokyo, and she was like, well, you're an idiot. But to me, the idea of doing something and not expecting to be the best is really stupid. The same way I told Daniel that this book is going to be the best book, because it is. Because I wrote it, and I know it is, and we worked really hard on making sure that I take the responsibility of selling things very seriously, and I think that when you ask people to give you their money or their time, that, you know, it's a big responsibility and that you really have to deliver. And I think that, you know, this restaurant I did in Japan, and this whole idea of hospitality, and then the opportunity to write this book and, you know, ask people after they've had a long day at work or when they're tired, or take a whole Sunday and cook all day, you know, you're really asking a lot of them. And so for me, it was really exciting. I mean, like I said, this is the challenge, really. I mean, this whole story of Japan, and, you know, what I did with the competition of all these other shops and blah blah blah, but that's really just me and my mishigas, my stuff, you know, but what it's really about is, you know, if you're a real professional and you embrace what you do, you know, how well can you really do it? And, you know, that was really the excitement. It wasn't that I was trying to do something no foreigner had ever done before or anything. It was just more about, can I open this little shop, get in enough people to recognize that I know how to cook and I make good food, and get them to sit down, which is what every chef does in every country all over the world. That's really what it comes down to as far as being a chef. I mean, can you get, you know, you can be the best. You know, we all know of at least one restaurant that it was so unfair that it closed, but it closed anyway. And you'd be like, my God, that owner, he was the nicest guy. They had the best food, they had the greatest wine list, whatever it was, but for whatever reason it closed. And so there's, you know, you know, to succeed in this game I'm in, you have to be able to get someone to sit in that chair long enough that you can convince them that they should come back. And it's hard. It's really, really hard. And just making good food's not really enough either. But also intellectually, it's very, very fascinating and stimulating and exciting. And that's sort of what led me up to this point, and this exciting thing of having this book.
So one thing I'm curious about is, you have this plan now to open a ramen shop, and as you said, you didn't know how to make ramen. Like, there's a ramen, you know, they say there's a ramen obsession here, but obviously when you look at Japan, there's what do we have, like maybe 10, 12 ramen places in the city that we talk about here versus the thousands upon thousands there. In your eyes, like as an American in Japan, what makes ramen? What is a bowl of ramen? I mean, I feel like I know it when I see it, but are there defining characteristics that?
Well, I mean, you know, ramen is first of all, there's a lot of really bad bowls of ramen in Tokyo too, and it's a real fast food item, and there's a lot of, you know, so some people think that ramen is really soup with noodles, but it's really not. Because if you make chicken noodle soup, as long as you have a pretty good chicken soup with some chopped up fresh, you know, carrots, and you can dump any kind of noodle in it, and if it tastes good and it's comforting, you win, and it works, and people say that's great. I mean, you don't have to find the perfect noodle to get in that chicken soup. It works because you're just really a soup noodle really is having good soup with things floating in it that taste good, and that's all. Whereas with ramen, it needs to be perfectly harmonious to work. All the things, and there's a lot of things in ramen that, you know, most people never really know that's in there. But, you know, there's carefully made soup. Sometimes, obviously in my case, more than one kind of soup. A lot of the classic ramen soups have many, many, many ingredients. It's cooked for many hours. There's different ingredients taken in. Some only go in for a few minutes or a few hours, and then they pull them out, and then they add something else in. And it's this whole complicated. A lot of it's bullshit, but you know, but the ones that really work, you know, it can be quite complicated. But, you know, a good bowl of ramen has all these things that marry. And, you know, to me, and I happen to make my own noodles. So, I mean, I had this, it was sort of a nutty thing to decide. You know, I bought a $20,000 noodle machine, which I had no idea how to use. And you know, I didn't necessarily know what it was going to do for me. But somehow I wanted to be like the Apple computer of ramen shops. You know, I wanted to make the soup and make the noodles, you know. And I figured it was a good idea. It was hard work. And as far as a business decision, I'm not sure making your own noodles is a particularly good one either, because it complicates everything. But I really understand what I do because I understand how noodles and how soup work together. And, you know, in a really good bowl of ramen, I try to explain it as you don't really know where any one ingredient starts and where any one ingredient ends. They all kind of come together. And, you know, the soup, the noodles, when you eat them, the flavoring in the bowl sticks to the noodles, so you get the flavor of the soup with each bite of noodle. And when in a bad bowl of ramen, you can almost taste all the ingredients separately, which might sound good, but it's actually really terrible. You really shouldn't know necessarily. The same way if you go to a great restaurant, you eat a great plate of food. I mean, you don't need to know what's in there. You just need to know that it tastes good, it looks beautiful, and it's pleasing, and you can leave it up to the chef to get all that stuff together. And I think ramen is like that. And there's endless varieties of ramen. There's endless styles, and believe me, endless ridiculous geeky conversations on what's right and what's wrong. And that's why I named my shop Ivan Ramen, because I'm not an expert of ramen, but I'm an expert at Ivan Ramen, which is enough for me.
It's my perception is that not only was your ramen embraced by Tokyo and Japan and everyone, but the perception is that it is inherently Japanese. It's not like a fusion ramen or an American version of ramen. I mean, before we go any farther, do you agree with that, or is that
wrong?
Well,
first of all, I don't really believe in fusion anything. It's one of the most horrible words ever made, unless you're talking about physics. But I mean, as far as my food goes, when I opened my shop, I mean, I was very fully aware of my nationality and the color of my skin, and the history of our two countries and all of that. And I knew it was a hook, and it was a great idea, obviously. But I also knew that if the food wasn't easily understood and great, I would have, basically, like I said, I would have gotten people to come once. Mm-hmm. And that when they would have said, see, I told you a white guy can't make ramen. So, I mean, I really needed to choose, it was easy to choose because what the ramen I'm famous for is the ramen I love to eat. So, it's not like I've never felt compelled to necessarily make some kind of Italian style ramen or a goulash style ramen, which quite honestly I'm fine with. And, I'm a cook and I can do whatever I want because it's my house. And, but I think that, I think with ramen, I'm a bit of a traditionalist. And, I mean, when you run a restaurant, it's always good to have other things so that your regulars can get a special treat and they have other things to order and there are specials to keep them, excited about your shop. So there's another whole discussion about how to run a restaurant. But, I knew that when I opened, it was important for my customers to say, hey, this tastes like a great bowl of ramen that I would get anywhere at any great ramen shop in Japan. And my ramen is very different than most people's. I use whole grain flour, which was because now everybody does it, but when I did it, nobody did it, and and people gave me shit for doing it, but I did it anyway because I had a real idea of what the noodles should taste like. So if actually there's anything really different about my ramen, is that my noodles. There's almost no place in Japan, as far as I know, that tastes like my noodles because I made up all the recipes and I didn't have anything to copy from. I just sort of came up with it. But other than that, I mean, I used all the ingredients everybody else uses, and I didn't want any much room for people to say this is gaijin flavor.
Mm-hmm. There were, in addition to the noodles, though, you did have some innovations. Sofrito is something that you use, and is that something that other people were using? Yeah, but I think it's
I just think it's the name. If you're from Italy or Spain or whatever, you say sofrito. I think that in Japan, I think the notion of cooking aromatics in oil and flavoring it is, done all over the world.
Right.
And so, and I don't claim to do anything new, there's very little you can think of that hasn't been thought of or done in this world. So, mm-hmm. I'm always suspect of people that claim to have done something first. So I don't like to be that person. But, I came, listen, I was reading the French Laundry and getting all kinds of ideas for my ramen shop. So I read the books. I read some Japanese. I read English better, and so I read a lot of cookbooks. I got a lot of ideas, and I did things. Listen, I would go to these ramen shops, and my friends would say the ramen has to be really hot, otherwise it's bad and it's wrong. And then I would go to these shops and they would take an ice cold piece of fat-laden pork from the fridge and drop it on top of the ramen. And I would say, well, why would you serve ice cold meat in a really hot bowl of soup? So I started heating my meat, which supposedly was a great innovation. And I served roasted tomatoes on my ramen, which no one else was doing. And and it works, and it's really good. But it sort of makes sense because it's got all that umami and stuff going on. But so I did my own little thing. I've done a few of my own little things.
So talking about the heat of the ramen, in the intro to your book, David Chang sort of writes this advisory letter to you about what to watch out for, and a big part of it is how basically most of us here don't really know much about ramen or how to eat it or any of these things. Plus a lot of other stuff that he warns you to watch out for with kind of stupid customers and that kind of stuff. So I'm wondering.
Yeah, but he's so funny. We're so different. We really are. I mean, he's super successful, and I can only dream to have a fraction of his success. But he thinks, when we met, and he's changed a lot, by the way. He's when he was young and brash and had a little tiny shop, he was, he had all kinds of things to say, but now he has 17 restaurants, and, the fact of the matter is you need to make people happy if you want to succeed, and I'm a glass half full guy, and I'm a hospitality guy. I love when people are happy. The reason I cook is because I like feeding people, and I like talking to people, and I like engaging people. I mean, that's what I like to do. I mean, I think that's, when I went to Johnson O'Connor in 1980 or something, and I had my aptitude test, they said, this guy's got to be around people. So, they didn't say he needs to be in a kitchen. I'm not the geeky chef who needs to cook all day long and never talk to anybody. I like working the crowd and talking to people. It's what I enjoy. So, listen, he's right. I mean, the people, he said in the foreword that, Americans won't slurp and they won't eat the ramen when it's hot, and I'm going to do my best as I open my restaurants to tell people, you can do what you want because it's your dime, but ramen just doesn't taste good when it's not hot. So you decide. You can learn how to eat it and make noise and burn your mouth a few times. And I'll say this, I mean, how many people have burned the roof of their mouth more than once on a fucking piece of pizza? I mean, we all know it's dumb, but we also know that if you wait until the pizza gets cold, it tastes like shit. So you muddle through, and then like on every 100th slice, you burn your mouth. And that's just the deal. And especially if it's brick oven. I mean, brick oven, you get like 9.5 minutes before you can just throw it in the trash. So everybody eats as fast as they can. And ramen's just the same thing. You need to learn how to slurp it. I don't blame anybody because it's a totally new thing. I mean, I opened my shop in 2007, and just the last 7 years or so, the ramen scene in Tokyo has completely flipped like 3 times. And when I first started, women barely ate it, and families didn't eat it, and now, whole families go on ramen eating, binges, and beautiful women in Chanel outfits sit with their friends, and they Twitter and laugh and eat ramen and get covered head to toe in chicken fat. So, it's things have changed quite a bit, and I think things will change here. But I'm an optimist. I hope that I can convince people to, eat it while it's really hot, and we have some fun and clever ideas to convince them, and hopefully it'll work out, and fingers crossed, and we'll see.
So eat it while it's hot. Don't let it sit too long. Slurp. You gotta slurp. We're gonna have a whole illustration on how to eat it. And so when I try to slurp, because I've heard that's what you're supposed to do. I'm always concerned because I'm going to splatter myself. It sounds like you just need to splatter.
Well, let me ask you a question. When you eat ribs, do you attempt to not get messy? Truth.
I do not care if my hands or my face gets messy, but I don't want to get like barbecue sauce down
well, then you make a bib or something. Okay. But the fact is that there's certain food you eat that makes you messy, and you can be a wimp and eat like an idiot, or you can just say, when I eat ribs, I'm going to be messy, and when I eat ramen, I'm going to be noisy and look stupid and enjoy myself. And that's, and other times you can eat sushi with chopsticks.
Fair enough. I feel like I have permission now to just go.
You have to go to town.
And now
we're running just a little low on time, so
okay.
Pretty soon we want to grab a couple audience questions, but okay. You guys want to...
I guess we'll just to wrap it up. Obviously, now you're here. You still have your shops open, your 2 places open in Tokyo, and you have 2 places. One Midtown West in Gotham Market that's going to open in probably a couple weeks, and then on the Lower East Side, you're hoping by the end of the year.
I'm not saying anything.
I know it's
opening. It's
New York
definitely
City
opening.
is always unpredictable.
It's coming. It's coming.
What has it been like coming back here? Because in your book you write a bit about how you built your bowl of ramen, how you found the purveyors for the various ingredients, the meats, this and that. You've come back here, and obviously you now have to, you can get some imported stuff, but you also have to sort of...
Well, I'm importing as little as possible because obviously everything that gets imported has to be ordered 3 months in advance and sent on a boat. So we've I redid everything when I moved back here, and the water's different, the flour's different, things are different, and we've retooled. And now my 2 main soups I'm going to do here, I do in Japan, and they're very close to what I serve there, and I think they're terrific. But we're chefs at the end, which means that you have to sort of be flexible, and you have to like when someone told me when I was a young cook, and he said, "What'd you do there?" I made some terrible mistake, and I said, "My knives just weren't sharp." He said, he says a craftsperson never blames their tools. Mm-hmm. So you got to kind of roll with the punches and figure out what to do, and your customers don't care what went wrong. They just want to know that what they're getting is good.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Should we?
Yeah. If there's anybody out there in the audience who has a question for Ivan this evening, we'd love to take some questions at this time. Anybody? Yeah.
Hi. So sort of in the same lines of what you were asking about your new places opening up here, are there any purposeful changes that you're going to be making to the menu, or any kind of? I've never been to your menu, to your restaurants in Tokyo, but as far as adapting to say vegetarian audiences or American audiences in general, anything in the
Well, I only cook for myself. I never cook for anyone else. But I also think that when a chef crafts a menu, you need to think about your customers and who you're feeding and what would make them happy. We're going to have a solid vegan ramen on the menu, and probably gluten-free following up to that, which I'm still working on a noodle. But and we have a couple of great vegan dishes as well. But I try not to cook. I don't like saying, okay, we have to deal with those vegetarians. What do you want to do? Because I just don't think that makes for good food. So we've done a lot of cooking where we just cooked and we went, holy shit, that's amazing, and it's fucking vegan. And we'd be like, that's right, it is. That's awesome. And I like that. I like that cooking style more. I don't like, and I think that recently, there are a lot of vegetarians, but I also think there's a lot of people who just like eating vegetables now, and it's things in that respect. It's really interesting, and so I try to make food that just tastes good. And if it happens to not have meat in it, that's fine too. And we're gonna have some of that. I'm definitely more in that. Hey, if you rip that larynx out and you grill it, it tastes really good. I can't help it. I'm just I'm a little offal crazy, but I think we're going to cover the bases.
Awesome. I actually had kind of an ingredient-specific question because I'm still very new to the whole ramen thing myself, but one of the most kind of beautiful and interesting ingredients to me when I was looking through your book and places that I've been is the use of the half-cooked egg. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about what dishes you've decided to add that to and how it's really used, or how you select which eggs you're going to use for it, or how it enhances?
Well, the greatest thing about this, my egg, is that it's cooked so that the whites are hard and the inside is almost liquid, so that when and I've been eating ramen for 25 years or something. Never the instant kind, believe it or not. But I've been eating ramen for a long time, and I love putting that runny yolk in my spoon and mixing it with the soup and sucking. I could just drink a glass of egg yolk. I really love egg yolks, raw or cooked. I don't care. But it was a real labor of love. I spent like a week working on the eggs in Japan, and we went through like 5 or 6 different companies, and they can be real. I did an event where we did 1,000 bowls of ramen a day, and I peeled 600 eggs a day. So it was really miserable, but I still love the eggs. And I think it's going to be an add-on, actually. It's not going to be, it'll be, we're going to have a simple bowl of ramen, and you can add more meat, you can add an egg, you can add a tomato, and I think that's how we're going to start off and see if that works for people. And that way the price can be a little bit lower for people if they just want to have a simple bowl of ramen. And sometimes you just want a simple bowl of ramen. And I'm hoping the Uptown place is going to hopefully be a little bit more like Japan, where you walk up, you're going to line up at a cash register, you're going to order off a big menu, and you'll find a seat either at the counter that we have, or there's communal seating. We're also going to do takeout, so you could take it on a picnic. Well, maybe we'll have delivery. We're working on that, and so hopefully it'll be really accessible and easy to get. And to me, the real joy of ramen is that it's like any really quick food, like a falafel or a slice of pizza or any of that. You got to go to a meeting, or you're going to the movies, or you want to go on your walk, or whatever it is, and you're hungry, and you go, let's just go grab a bowl, and you get to slurp down a bowl. That's where the slurping, we come back to it, because it's like you shouldn't be spending 40 minutes eating a bowl of ramen. It's retarded. You need to like slurp it down and eat it. I get to use that word if you're over 40. I'm 50. So
good to know.
It's actually it made the cutoff.
Wonderful. Do we have any other questions out there this evening?
When you're talking about a simple bowl of ramen, you have the double soup, the chicken broth, and then
the dashi blend. Yes.
Do you do? Because I see in the book you mentioned the shio ramen. Do you also do the miso or the?
Nope. It's somewhat funny. Sometimes, I look at these menus and go to some of these ramen shops, and it's almost like a greatest hits of Japanese ramen, and they have every single freaking iteration. In Japan, if you do miso soup, most places only do miso ramen, or they might do it as a special. And good miso ramen is really complex, and it takes a lot of effort to do it, and you usually need a wok. And I'm not saying I won't ever do it, but I think what we're starting off with is a relatively simple menu that we can control and make really good stuff. And then as we move forward, we'll hopefully do specials, and then if everybody loves it or it works out really well, maybe it'll go on the menu. And we're also when the warmer months come, I do lots of different cold stuff, and I'm really into cold noodles. So we do a lot of good cold things. But I promise you'll be happy. I'm actually saying that with the highest of confidence. Okay. Yeah, but you know what? Even if you go to Tokyo, there's like 4 places that make good miso ramen. I mean, seriously, they all suck, and it's really hard to make it right. It actually takes a lot of effort, and and they put a ton of fat in there. And you're right, good miso ramen is unbelievably delicious. And you know what? I went to that place called Misoya the other day. And it wasn't bad. I mean, I didn't love it. The soup wasn't hot enough. I could say the things I didn't like about it, but you know what? It was quite flavorful. And one of the things I judge about restaurants, even if I don't like anything about it, if everybody in the restaurant looks happy, I shut my yap and I say, you know what? Everybody looks happy. Who am I to say I don't like it? So I mean, everybody looked happy, and they all seemed to be having a good time, and it had a nice flavor. It's definitely a choice. You should check it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other than DC, there's a place called Ranch Ramen.
Oh, good.
And they also have the shio and the shui.
Now listen, it's a brotherhood. It's there's not a lot of us, and ramen makes people happy, and it's a good thing to see more and more shops. There's certainly plenty of room for more shops. Yeah.
What is your favorite bowl of ramen in New York before your restaurant opened? Obviously.
I think Ippudo is really good. I don't love the atmosphere there, quite honestly. I mean, I like the ones in Japan more. It's sort of like this weird sort of Looney Tunes meets like Japanese manga or something. I mean, it's just, I don't get it really. It's, and I'm friends with them and I like them, and I don't love the atmosphere there, but boy, they're really good. I mean, it's really consistent, it's super clean. They're really fast. The food comes out really fast. Yeah, well, I don't think they do there. I think they do
on the west side one, they do have the egg on the side now. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know what? My wife, we went and ate, and she goes, it tastes like the one in our town we used to live in. So, it's really close, and it's it's Hakata style ramen, which is a Kyushu ramen, and that's like my least favorite, just personally, and it has nothing to do with whether it's good or bad. I tend to like the style I make. I like the lighter style. My system doesn't handle all that pork bone soup as well. But I think Ippudo's quite quiet. You know, Chuco is really fun. The one in Brooklyn, they're really nice and they do a good job. Where else have I been? I haven't been to that many other places. Bossa Nova, they're getting their act together down in on Mott Street, and that tastes very Japanesey. They got a lot of fish flavor going on.
Wonderful. Well, that's all the questions we have for this evening. We'd like to thank Ivan and Daniel for joining us tonight, and thank you guys for coming as well. If you haven't had a chance to, make sure you check out Ivan's book on your way out. Take care.